This unusual child's name is Derek, and even his own mother was afraid of him. At some point, things went so far that the woman felt like a prisoner in her own home. How could a young boy scare his mother? Why did Derek behave this way? Who is to blame for him turning into an uncontrollable monster? Today's story describes a truly horrific case that, in principle, could happen in any family where children are raised incorrectly and obvious problems are ignored. If you are a parent or plan to become one, try to avoid the mistakes discussed in this story. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Derek Kampas was born on November 13, 1991, in the city of Marshfield, Wisconsin, where the rest of this case takes place. Shelley became pregnant with her son when she was only 19 years old and was studying to become a nurse in her first year of college. At the time, the young woman felt too young to have children and was completely unprepared for motherhood. It seemed to her that everything happened too quickly. She hadn't yet had the chance to enjoy her status as an adult or earn her degree when her belly started to grow. Nevertheless, Shelley decided to keep the baby and completely change her lifestyle. Moreover, the young woman was going to be a single mother because the father of her unborn child vanished as soon as he heard about the pregnancy. When Derek was born, Shelley's world turned upside down. She adored her little boy. The child grew up very cute. His chubby cheeks alone were enough to melt hearts. Now, looking at her son, Shelley couldn't stop rejoicing that she had made the right decision and wasn't afraid of any challenges. When Derek was just 7 weeks old, tragedy struck. The boy became seriously ill. He developed a severe respiratory virus and pneumonia. He was in such bad condition that doctors worried whether the baby would survive. The child was urgently airlifted to a hospital in Minnesota because every minute counted. Shelley was in complete horror at the thought that she might lose her boy. The entire way to the hospital, she prayed that he would have the strength to hold on. Fortunately, a miracle happened, and Derek pulled through. Shelley was over the moon with happiness. She couldn't believe that her little boy would recover and continue to delight her with his smile. However, the severe illness and the fact that Derek had nearly lost his life completely changed his future. From that moment on, Shelley decided that her son would get everything he wanted, whenever he wanted it. She was terrified by the thought of losing her child. That fear stayed with her for life, so Shelley wanted to give Derek everything in her power. Of course, at first glance, this seems wonderful. Any normal parent wants to make their child happy and provide them with everything they need. However, in Shelley's case, things developed a bit differently. At first, everything went fairly well. Derek recovered and became a typical toddler, playing with a ball, learning to ride a bike, and loving to walk with his mom in the park. He was just like other kids. But Shelley continued to spoil Derek more and more. When the boy got older and realized that the whole world revolved around him, he started to take advantage of it. That's when the real problems began, because even in early childhood, Derek showed some behavioral issues. By the age of 7, the boy had a bad temper. He was very defiant and never did what his mom asked. The kid constantly argued with her and always stood his ground, going far beyond typical childish tantrums. One day, Shelley and her son went to a mall to buy groceries. As they passed the toy department, Derek saw toy trucks in the display. The trucks were so bright that they naturally caught attention. Of course, the little boy wanted a truck. He ran to the toy shelf, grabbed one truck, and handed it to his mom to buy. Shelley put the truck back and calmly said that Derek had enough toy trucks at home. They were there for groceries, so she wouldn't buy the truck. Instead of following his mom, Derek threw the biggest tantrum of his life. He grabbed the toy truck and started smashing it on the floor until it broke. Even when the truck shattered into hundreds of pieces, Derek didn't stop his tantrum. But that's not all. The boy told his mom that if she didn't buy him a truck, he'd break another toy in the store. Shelley was completely shocked. Her son caused a wild scene in the store. He screamed so loudly that other shoppers stared at the child and shook their heads disapprovingly. At that moment, Shelley realized she should have set some rules for Derek and explained that such behavior was unacceptable. However, she didn't do that because, when Derek was just 7 weeks old and nearly died, she had promised herself to give her son everything he wanted. So Shelley bought him the toy truck and separately paid for the one he broke. After that incident in the store, Derek learned he could demand anything from his mother. Over time, this behavior repeated multiple times. The boy didn't just throw tantrums, he became aggressive, and when his mother tried to explain something to him, Derek would lash out at her with fists and screams. In the end, all his wishes were fulfilled. Since Shelley always gave in to her son, she reinforced his bad behavior. The concept of discipline was absent in Derek's life. He was the epitome of a spoiled child. Over the years, Shelley began to notice some oddities in her son. One day, she observed that Derek didn't play with his toys like other kids did. He would simply take them out of the box, neatly line them up in front of himself, and then just sit and stare at them. When he got bored, he would put the toys back in the box. Derek also had a peculiar approach to food. He never ate anything with his hands. Burgers, potato chips, donuts, sandwiches, he ate them all with a fork. Perhaps he found it unpleasant to touch food with his hands, or there was some other issue. Shelley described it as something strange. She never thought her son might have special needs that required attention, or that he might have a condition needing medical expertise. No, she just called her son quirky. And all these things, which might seem minor at first glance, but perhaps needed investigation, were simply ignored. Moreover, Derek struggled at school. He found it hard to communicate with other kids and make friends, so he grew up incredibly lonely and isolated from his peers. Sometimes he showed aggression toward others, whether it was another child or an adult. If someone did something Derek didn't like, he would clench his fists and start shaking violently, which looked abnormal. Once, a classmate came to his house, and Derek took out all his toys, lined them up as usual, and started staring at them. Meanwhile, the other child reached for a toy car, and Derek didn't like it at all. He absolutely didn't want anyone else touching his things because he simply didn't know how to share. The guest's innocent attempt to take his toy sparked real rage in Derek. He lunged at the boy, knocked him to the floor, and started beating him, repeating over and over that those were his things, and he hadn't allowed anyone to touch them. Finally, Shelley heard the noise in the kid's room. She ran in, pulled her son off, and then took the other child to the living room, leaving Derek alone in the room to play with his toys. When the classmate's mom came to pick him up, Shelley said, essentially covering up her son's behavior, that there had been a minor incident between the boys. As a result, her son's behavior went unpunished again. When Derek turned 9, Shelley got a boyfriend. The couple had been dating for several months, but Robert hadn't yet met Shelley's son, though he had heard from her about his character quirks. The thing is, the mother was simply afraid of Derek's reaction to a new man in the house. When Robert finally met the child, he acted strangely, approaching the boy, and the first thing he did, parting his hair to inspect his scalp. Shelley asked what was going on, and Robert, with a smirk, explained that he was looking for the mark of 666 on Derek's head. It was an odd introduction between an adult and a spoiled child, but Shelley's reaction was even worse. She knew about her son's behavioral issues, but still supported Robert's joke, saying that there was definitely a devil in Derek. It's quite obvious that the man chose a completely wrong tone for his first meeting with his lover's son, and from that moment, their relationship only got worse. Robert and Shelley got married, and eventually the husband moved into his wife's house and decided that it was now his job to establish rules there. Of course, in some ways, the man was undoubtedly right. It's normal for there to be some discipline in a household, for a child to understand what's bad and what's good. However, Robert took the wrong approach. From the start, he was incredibly strict with Derek, telling him what to do and enforcing rules with an iron fist. Derek was about 10 years old, and throughout his entire life, not only had he not followed any discipline, he didn't even know such a concept existed. His mother never punished him and always fulfilled his every wish. The boy couldn't understand where this man came from, moving into their house and trying to dictate his rules. So it's no surprise that Derek began to rebel even more and express his dissatisfaction to his mother. Instead of explaining basic things to her son, Shelley tried to please him in every way. Whenever Robert and his rules weren't around, the mother did everything possible to make Derek happy. She showered him with praise, attention, gifts, everything he wanted. She apologized for her husband's behavior and tried to compensate for the imposition of discipline and new rules. The mother's stance sent Derek completely mixed signals. Robert was too strict, while Shelley was too soft. So now Derek simply waited for Robert to go to work and started manipulating his mother. Christmas came, and Shelley bought her son a new PlayStation console. The boy had been insisting on this gift for a long time, so he eagerly awaited Christmas morning. As soon as he opened his eyes, Derek rushed downstairs straight to the Christmas tree. He wanted to open all his presents immediately, but Robert stopped him. The man declared that they would all sit down to breakfast together first, as is proper in a normal family. Only then would Derek be allowed to open his presents. He sat the boy at the table and placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, which Derek hated. He said that until the plate was empty, the boy wouldn't leave the table. Naturally, Derek wasn't going to eat something he didn't like. He silently stared at the plate and did nothing. Derek sat at the table all day. He didn't eat a single bite of the eggs and didn't say a word. It was a silent, tense protest against Robert. Christmas is a magical day for many children. Derek's holiday was completely ruined. The boy went to bed on Christmas without presents, without fun, and without food. He didn't eat a single crumb all day. The next day, Robert went to work. Only Derek and his mom were left in the house. Shelley did what she always did. She apologized to her son for Robert's actions, tried to hug and comfort him, saying that now he could calmly open his presents. Derek slowly walked to the Christmas tree. He opened his new PlayStation and began to destroy it. The boy broke everything he could. He was very angry and wanted to punish his mother for what her husband had done. And what did Shelley do? What she always did. She went to the store and bought another gaming console to give to her son. In this Christmas situation, of course, you can only sympathize with the boy, who was deprived of his long-awaited holiday, punished for no reason. The adult's behavior cannot be called normal because Robert's treatment of Derek bordered on abuse. And Shelley, instead of protecting her child, silently watched it happen. She absolutely shouldn't have allowed Robert to treat her son that way, especially on Christmas. The adults did such contradictory things that it's no surprise Derek's fragile psyche started to malfunction. Shelley really needed to set some boundaries and discipline in her son's life. Then Robert would have had fewer reasons to pick on him. Christmas passed, and family relationships only got worse. Derek grew older and turned into a teenager. If before he simply tolerated Robert and then took out all his grievances on his mother, now he began to confront the man physically. Shelley was constantly torn between her son and her husband. The woman was too scared to take a firm stance with Derek. She knew that as soon as Robert went to work, she would be left alone with an enraged teenager. Shelley felt like a prisoner in her own home. She constantly walked on eggshells just to avoid triggering Derek's anger and aggression toward her, because in essence, he was the master of the house. At the same time, Shelley continued to ignore the situation, burying her head in the sand. Apparently, the mother hoped everything would resolve itself. But it didn't. Derek grew older, and his conflicts with Robert took on a different tone. After each clash, Shelley secretly praised her son and apologized for what Robert said and did. She still tried to cover up the hurts caused by her husband with her love and attention, regardless of how Derek behaved. However, at some point, Shelley decided she'd had enough and that she needed to finally try to do something. She took her son to a psychotherapist. Unfortunately, here too, the woman was unlucky. Shelley encountered an unprofessional therapist. Without conducting a proper evaluation of Derek's behavior, the doctor quickly diagnosed him with depression, and that was the end of it. Maybe the boy did have depression, but it was unlikely his main problem. Nevertheless, the doctor prescribed antidepressants for the teenager and ended the session. Naturally, things only got worse. Instead of any positive changes in behavior, Derek completely withdrew into himself and practically stopped talking. He simply disconnected from reality and isolated himself even more from his peers. At the same time, his anger and aggression didn't go away, they only intensified. So, it seems the medication wasn't suitable for him. A few more years passed. The confrontation between Robert and Derek ended in the boy's favor. Shelley's husband couldn't take it, and they separated. Of course, there could have been other issues between the spouses, but the fact remains. Derek had just turned 18. He was in his final year of high school. At this time, a very important event happened in his life. He got a girlfriend. Derek had absolutely no romantic experience. He simply didn't allow himself to get close to anyone, let alone form friendships. However, this girl was radically different from most of Derek's peers. Her name was Macy McCullough. She attended the same school but was 2 years younger. Macy was only 16, and she was the complete opposite of Derek. She was described as incredibly sweet, friendly, and extremely sociable. Macy planned to graduate high school and pursue a career in medicine. They say opposites attract, and so the young people instantly found common ground. It was amazing because Derek finally met someone with whom he could feel at ease and open up. Shelley had never seen her son so happy. He became very caring and attentive. A smile never left his face, and his anger and aggression seemed to fade away. The mother was overjoyed because, deep down, she feared her son was incapable of loving someone close to him and would never be truly happy. At first, everything went wonderfully, but soon after the relationship began, 16-year-old Macy told Derek she was pregnant. The boy was in complete shock and couldn't believe it. In reality, the young man was thrilled by the unexpected news. He told Macy he was ready to become a father and would do everything to ensure his child grew up healthy. It seemed Derek had finally found someone he could be himself with. As soon as the woman learned she would soon become a grandmother, she invited Macy to live with them. At a young age, the girl had lost her mother. She was raised by her father, who worked a lot and was often absent from home. Knowing she would soon need help with the baby, Macy agreed and moved in with Derek. At that moment, they got engaged. 9 months later, Macy gave birth to a boy named Gabriel, and Derek and Shelley were over the moon with happiness. From the first days, the young man genuinely cared for his son, striving to be a good father. He adored Gabriel. After finishing high school, Derek immediately turned into a stay-at-home dad and spent all his time with his little son. He changed diapers himself, fed him with Macy, bathed him, played with him, and put him to bed. Obviously, after the baby was born, Macy returned to school. She spent a lot of time at classes, but Derek was even happy that all the responsibilities for their son were on him. For a while, everything went smoothly, everyone was content, and got along well. But then Derek's unusual behavior started to resurface. Now, the young man, like his mother's new husband Robert once did, decided to establish a certain routine in the house. As his son grew older and had a daily schedule, Derek forced everyone in the household to follow specific rules. Everything had to be done at a strictly designated time in the same order. Now everyone had the same morning, day, and evening. For example, one of the contentious issues was the curtains. For some reason, Derek didn't want natural light to enter the house, so he insisted on keeping the curtains closed all day in every room. But Shelley wasn't used to living in darkness. She would go downstairs and open the curtains. Then Derek would rush into the living room, pull the curtains back, and start a fight. In the end, Shelley always agreed and gave in to her son, as she had done all her life. Derek insisted on strictly following his routine. He imposed these rules most heavily on his fiancée, Macy, constantly criticizing her, yelling, or scolding her for doing something wrong. After their son was born, Derek became incredibly controlling and began treating Macy demeaningly. He started dictating who she could see and where she could go. Now Macy wasn't allowed to take a step without Derek's permission. The only place she was allowed to go was school, then a part-time job, after which Macy had to come straight home. To any normal person, it was clear that Derek was going too far in his desire to control everything. But Shelley just watched and never interfered in her son and his fiancée's relationship. She never tried to protect Macy or tell Derek that he was acting wrongly and that his behavior was offensive. Shelley was simply afraid of her son. However, this behavior didn't protect her from her heir's wrath. On the contrary, Derek began to get angry at his mother, calling her a pathetic failure and mocking her alcoholism. After parting with Robert and mourning her worthless life, the woman began drinking little by little, and soon she couldn't imagine a day without alcohol. Shelley never expected her son to turn against her. It was incredibly painful for the mother to hear all these hurtful insults. But she had neither the strength nor the desire to stand up to her son. She simply let Derek treat her and Macy however he wanted once again. One day, returning home, Shelley walked into the kitchen and found her son sitting at the kitchen table with a firearm in his hands. He had bought an AK-47, though he had never shown any interest in weapons before. This was a real shock for Shelley. Naturally, she asked what was going on, to which she heard a response that made her blood run cold. Derek pointed the gun at his mother and said she'd better sleep with one eye open because one night he would shoot her or slit her throat. At that moment, Shelley realized that her son, whom she loved and spoiled so much, was capable of easily taking her life. Shelley was in complete horror. When Derek wasn't home, she had a deadbolt installed on her bedroom door, so her son couldn't get in at night. Most of the time, the woman didn't leave her room unless absolutely necessary. Shelley's fears grew even stronger when Derek started asking about her life insurance policy. The boy didn't want to be left without money if something happened to his mother, so now she felt like a true prisoner in her own home. And that's when her alcoholism worsened even more. Shelley locked herself in her room and drank, trying to heal her emotional wounds this way. But besides Shelley, Macy and little Gabriel lived in the house, and Derek's fiancée bore the brunt of it all. The boy turned into a real domestic tyrant. One day, when he wasn't home, the women talked. They both complained about Derek's behavior and decided they needed to get rid of him. They could manage with the child without him. Besides, Gabriel would be safer if his father was far away, because Derek's behavior was getting worse and worse every day. Shelley and Macy decided to kick the only man out of the house, but they soon abandoned their idea because they were too afraid of him. Shelley had a Labrador dog named Lucy. Derek never truly loved Lucy. He was annoyed by the dog's fur and the mess it caused. One day, Shelley had to go to the hospital for a scheduled gallbladder removal surgery. After a short stay in the hospital, she returned home and discovered that her dog was missing. When the mother asked where Lucy was, Derek responded with a cold, chilling look. Then he casually said that the dog ran out onto the road and got hit by a car. He supposedly took Lucy to the vet where she died. The vets cremated the dog, and then Derek disposed of the ashes, so he saw no reason for concern and didn't understand why it bothered his mother. Deep down, Shelley knew her son was lying. Lucy was an adult, well-behaved dog. She would never have run out onto the road for no reason. Shelley believed her son had simply gotten rid of the animal because he wanted to hurt her. Perhaps he just took her far from home and abandoned her, or maybe shot her in the woods somewhere. However, the mother didn't confront Derek about his lie and, once again, stayed silent. This went on for 2 years. Derek controlled everything around him, set his own rules, insulted, and intimidated the household. Macy and Shelley were trapped with him in the same house, living in this nightmare day after day. Macy had just turned 18 and she graduated high school. And then, the girl decided she'd had enough. She had to get out of that house, no matter what. Little Gabriel was already 2 years old. Macy kept telling Shelley that she wanted to leave Derek. She could no longer endure the humiliations and abuse, but she didn't know how to pull it off. The girl was afraid that Derek might hurt her. She also understood that if she took Gabriel with her, his father would lose it, and that would only make things worse. But she couldn't leave the child with this monster either. In the end, after long planning, Macy simply walked out of the house and didn't return. She left her son with Shelley and, deep down, sincerely believed it would be better and safer for Gabriel. Once outside the house, Macy thought she was finally free. Unfortunately, her freedom didn't last long, as the story took a much darker turn. As soon as Derek returned home and realized Macy had left, he displayed very unusual behavior. The first thing he did was open all the curtains and let in sunlight, something he had never done before. Then he started pacing the living room, repeating the same phrase over and over. "I won't let another man be the father of my son." Derek kept saying he wouldn't give up the child. Although Gabriel was at home, for some reason, Derek was fixated on the idea that Macy was having an affair, that she was seeing another man behind his back, and that this man would raise his son. Shelley, as usual, watched Derek from the sidelines and didn't intervene. She just worried that her son might do something foolish. The woman even called her ex-husband Robert and asked for advice. The man, apparently not wanting to deal with others' problems, said that Derek was probably depressed again and that it was better to leave him alone for now. On September 7th, 2012, Shelley was out all day. She was attending an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. When she returned, Macy's car was parked in the driveway near their house. Her first thought was doubt. It was unlikely the girl had returned of her own accord. Then Shelley noticed that the front door was open, which made her panic. And when she walked inside and saw a trail of blood running through the house, Shelley calmed down for a moment. She thought Derek had lost his temper again, broken a mirror or something, and cut Renji. Cut himself. She followed the trail of blood down the hallway, which led to the bathroom. The door was closed, but a large pool of blood had seeped out from under it. Shelley flung the door open and froze in place. In the bathtub, covered in blood, lay Macy with her throat slit. Unfortunately, it was too late. Shelley could do nothing to help the girl, as 18-year-old Macy McCullough was dead. Shelley's body went rigid with fear. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. It felt like she was in a horror movie. The scene in the bathroom seemed unreal, but it was happening. Macy was dead. The mother had no doubt that her son had done it. Then Shelley remembered her grandson, Gabriel. Could Derek have harmed his own child? The boy was nowhere in the house, nor was Derek. Shelley immediately called emergency services and reported the incident. The arriving police searched the house again and then took Shelley to the station to take her statement. While the officers asked standard questions, the woman, as if in a frenzy, kept repeating that Derek had taken Gabriel. And then it hit her. She suddenly had a vivid image of her enraged son taking his own life after killing her grandson. The vision was so clear that Shelley began trembling with fear. She immediately shared her suspicions with the detectives. In truth, the police had no idea where Derek might be or what he was capable of. They only knew that he had likely fled with the boy. A massive search operation for the father and son began. They didn't want to find them too late after a tragedy had occurred. Derek's face was everywhere, in all the news. The search continued through the night into the early morning of the next day. At 5 a.m, a motel employee called the police, reporting that the man they were looking for had just checked into a room with a small child. Law enforcement officers rushed to the motel immediately. They were armed and ready to apprehend the suspect, as Derek was suspected of murdering Macy McCullough and kidnapping the child. The police also knew he was armed. The only thing they didn't know was whether Gabriel was alive or if the man had harmed his own son. However, things turned out to be much simpler. As the team prepared to storm the motel room, Derek walked out with his hands raised. He had heard the noise in the hallway and realized he couldn't escape, so he surrendered to the police without a word. When they handcuffed him, they found 2-year-old Gabriel alive and unharmed inside the room. Thankfully, nothing had happened to him. Derek was immediately taken in for questioning, but first, he was given the right to make a phone call. The young man called his mother, Shelley, and told her he was sorry things turned out this way. He hadn't meant to do anything like that, but now nothing could be undone. At the end of the call, Derek, for the first time in his life, told his mother he loved her and asked her to take care of Gabriel. The police began their investigation and almost immediately found Macy's blood on Derek's clothes and in his car. The young man hadn't even bothered to dispose of the murder weapon, the knife, probably realizing they'd find him anyway. An autopsy of Macy's body revealed the brutality of the attack. Her carotid artery and jugular vein were severed. She had also been stabbed in the back. Macy had numerous defensive wounds on her hands, indicating she had fought back against her attacker. The case was essentially closed. All evidence pointed to Derek, and he was charged with intentional homicide. While the young man was in jail awaiting trial, his mother, Shelley, did everything she could to get her son out. She tried to fix the situation, as she had always done, and even planned to testify in Derek's defense. They say, a mother's love knows no bounds. Derek had just taken the life of an 18-year-old girl, the mother of his child, and Shelley was desperate to get him out of jail, not thinking that she could be next in Macy's place. However, no matter how hard Shelley tried, she could do nothing. There was too much evidence against Derek, and she even met with his public defender to devise a plan. Although Derek initially pleaded not guilty, he eventually took a plea deal in exchange for a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 40 years. But the story didn't end there. After the guilty verdict, when Derek learned he would spend most of his life behind bars, he paid another inmate over $4,000 to act as a hitman. Derek wanted the man to kill the person he believed Macy was having an affair with. Fortunately, the assassination attempt failed, but Derek was still charged with attempted solicitation. After the trial concluded, Shelley gained full custody of her grandson, Gabriel. Now, the most important thing is that the woman doesn't repeat her past parenting mistakes. Haunted by the scars of the past, Shelley couldn't return to her home. She stayed with a friend for a few days and then moved out of town, keeping away from the media and the internet. Since then, she has led a secluded life and has given only one interview. Shelley mentioned that she hasn't been able to find the strength to visit Macy's grave. A documentary film about this story titled Evil Lives Here. In the Grip of My Son was made. In it, Shelley talks about Derek's childhood and the crime he committed. She herself believes that her son didn't intend to take Macy's life. He simply lost control at some point and grabbed the knife. Currently, Derek Kampas has changed his name to Gabriel. He is still serving a life sentence in a Wisconsin correctional facility. Online discussions continue about who is to blame for Derek becoming a criminal. Some condemn the mother's behavior, saying she indulged her son's whims and didn't hold him accountable. Others defend the woman, citing statistics. There are many parents in the world who make serious mistakes in raising their children, but their kids don't become criminals. So, what was the decisive factor in this case? Was it poor parenting, or did nature play a cruel trick on Derek, making him aggressive and unable to control his emotions? If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.